Hello, Scott Golden with the Golden Opportunities Coaching YouTube channel and at PO Perception Twitter account. And today we're going to talk about dealing with negative or toxic people. And if you are struggling with someone who is toxic in your life, understanding what may make them that way, and also how you can deal with such an individual can be helpful and useful to you. Toxic people usually come down to a very simple concept, and that is their belief systems are based in some form of pain, selfishness, hurt, or expectation that is being unmet. Now, when we say pain, it is the traumas they have been through in the past that make them believe that the world is somehow against them or in a negative way. And that ultimately leads to them taking that pain, forcing it out onto others. And the actualization of that force is then multiplied and magnified through their desire to feel better. And every negative experience you have with a person really does come down to a very simple and somewhat basic way of being, and that is the desire for things to get better, even though it's not going in the way that a person wants them to go, is trumped by their belief that it cannot happen. Thus, their emotional state stays at a lower vibration or a lower emotional state, and thus that lower emotional state leads to depression or anxiety or frustration or anger or sadness or despair and all lower emotions. Now, how do you deal with the negative person? Number one, it is essential that you begin to understand it's not your job to fix another person. If you are in a relational situation, whether it be romantic relationship, family situation, your children, you must distance yourself from their negativity for three reasons. Number one, if you're enabling them to stay in that emotional state, then you are also enabling them not to grow and solve their own challenges. Number two, it can rub off on you or affect you, and then so you need to be able to see yourself as not wanting to be affected by such. Number three, it can actually influence how you see the world, thereby causing you to miss opportunities that normally would be afforded to you. Now, that doesn't mean that you should give up on a person or stop caring about a person or whatever, but it does mean distancing from them when they are in a negative space. Now, the removal of one's self from dealing with someone when they are in a negative space doesn't mean severing the relationship entirely, unless the toxic nature becomes to where there is an ultimatum given by the individual who's struggling with those negative emotions to the point of either stay and be miserable with me or get out of my way. And there are many people, especially those who have had extended periods of depression or anxiety or fear-based mentality, that actually do stay at that level. They stay at a level that is counterproductive because their belief is something, someone, a situation is going to make them feel better, and that they cannot control their emotional state until that circumstance arises for them to be able to do so. This is painful, and it's also very unnatural, uncomfortable for an individual who is trying to get their life back on track, mainly because the dealing with a negative person is also often a change in brain chemistry has taken place inside the individual that makes them believe that their life cannot, the key word there is can, not get better. And so you must begin to understand that you have to interact with them from a level of willingness to see that you can only invest as much as the other person is willing to invest in themselves. Dealing with the toxic individual also means setting good boundaries and self-care. Forgiveness of self, that you cannot help them or lead them out of their own misery or negative emotion, is another factor. So often I deal with clients who say, I should be able to do something. And the first thing I say to them is, why should you? And they say, well, if I cared in the right way, then this person would be changing. If I cared in the right way, they'd see themselves differently. If I cared in the right way, they would change their behavior. They'd give up drugs. They'd give up alcohol. They'd stop drinking. They'd stop cheating or being unfaithful in our relationship. They would stop the negativity. But the answer or that belief system is flawed because negativity is usually motivated by one of two things: despondency and not caring at all about circumstances except feeling better, or a desire to feel better through the negative behavior and not having a long range or long sighted version of how one believes that things can change or be better. And so when we have that mentality that nothing can get better for us, or when we have that mentality that it's too heavy, it's too hard, it's too late, all what I call the two mentalities, then we begin to get further and further, deeper and deeper into that despair and despondency. Now, what can you do for a person who is in that state? There are many action steps you can take. The first is to ask a series of powerful questions. And so what you do is you say, hey, what if you could do this, that, or another thing? What if this situation was gone from your life? What would it take for you to feel differently? When's the last time you felt differently? All of these are things to reset the mindset and mind frame of the individual at hand. Secondly, encourage them to become more physically active. When a person is physically active, they have different biochemistry, different biology, different hormones, and things secreting in the brain that allow them to change their focus. Also, physical activity creates different neural pathways in the brain, thus allowing for possibility of different beliefs to develop. Thirdly, encourage a person to get back to a creative hobby or outlet that they were once good at or found joy in. If a person believes that they can find a level of joy or creative outlet, they are more likely to feel that somebody can understand them, thereby somebody can appreciate them, thereby somebody can get to a better place within what really matters. And it's important to begin to understand, to recognize, and to kind of see that progress of dealing with a negative or toxic person means giving them compassion while maintaining boundaries. So often we have two opposites end of the spectrum when it comes to that. Either we're too compassionate, which means we go into martyrdom and self-sacrifice, or we're dismissive and we go, this person should control, can control, ought to know how to control their emotional state or where they are or how they behave. And the balance, the tripwire or the high wire that's really hard for those of us who do care about a person who has toxic tendencies to find is, how do we care about them without taking responsibility for them? When we take responsibility for another person, we hinder their growth. Even to some degree, children. Children, obviously, we need to take responsibility that they remain safe, but when we take responsibility for their emotional state, we don't give them the opportunity or the encouragement necessary to make intelligent decisions, to learn how to recover from disappointment and all these other things. And a lot of the social problems that we have now, unfortunately, do go down to children not having the proper coping mechanisms as it relates to dealing with hardships, dealing with difficulties, dealing with not knowing what they should do in a situation, or dealing with rejection, disappointment, or frustration. It's important to begin to realize as well that we can view rejection as an opportunity to align with something better for ourselves. So often people avoid rejection, but rejection is a natural evolutionary part of life, and dealing with a negative person is to say to them, you know what? This rejection that you've experienced here, this difficulty that you've experienced here is actually setting you up to have time for, or the energy for, or something different within the desires for what you're trying to accomplish, and gives you energy to do other things. Most often, a person who's constantly negative has to tell themselves a new story around the hardship they've suffered or the injustice that they've experienced before they can even begin to see other alternatives. The story that one holds on to is directly related to the outcome that they believe is possible for themselves. When the story is out of alignment, that story then becomes a repetitive loop in the habitual brain, which then leads to pain, suffering. Suffering is just the fixation on negative emotions over and over and over again, which then causes a person to believe that they can't ever find a solution, that they can't find where they want to be, that they're incapable of getting to a higher place or finding that solution, that workaround for whatever's in front of them. Your responsibility when dealing with a person who you believe to be negative or toxic is to make sure two things. Make sure that you are giving only as much as you are receiving back in kind in terms of energy given to the other person, and not take on the personal responsibility for the choices or emotional state that a person has. Remember, each individual, all 7.5 billion of us that are on the planet, have responsibility for our own individual emotional state. When you take responsibility for someone else's emotional state, what you begin to do is you begin to get weighted down by the energy and thought and emotional impact of their state of being. When that happens, you're going to create stress within your body. You're going to create anxiety within your mind and all these other things. And most often, if we constantly surround ourselves with negativity, even though we can claim to be positive people, and most of us, a lot of us anyway, are masqueraders. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, everything's good with me. But then, all of a sudden, when you really look at it, you're feeling so out of balance because you're taking on the energy and emotions of other people, not even realizing that that's throwing you out of balance, and that most of what you feel, much of what you feel, isn't even your own. Now, it's important to also realize that some people, and this is really difficult for people that are in relationships with somebody like this, some people do not desire to change. They are comfortable, or their self-identity is wrapped in a victim mentality, wrapped in a victim story, and they actually are more comfortable complaining than they are making positive improvements. If you're dealing with that type of person, you have to accept that that's who they are. They may change their focus, they may change the meaning they've given to something, but just because they don't do it now doesn't mean they can never do it. But you can't force a person to want to desire to change. You can't teach desire. Desire has to come from the individual, as does desperation. Any change that is born from desire or desperation is a change that will stick because it's a motivating factor that is unbreakable. If a person desires to change because they want something better, then they'll put in the work to ultimately make that come into alignment to be possible. If a person is desperate to change because they want to avoid a worse circumstance, they'll put in the work because they realize that the consequences is something that they don't want to change, and even if the change, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational, financial, or whatever else have you, is uncomfortable, they'll do it because the alternative is too painful. Pain is a motivator. The desire to avoid pain or the desire to overcome pain is a great motivator for most people. Desperation and desire are the ways that these things show self-evident. If you have a person in your life, though, who is stuck in that negative loop, who does not naturally desire to change, you are putting energy into something that can be fruitless for you. They must change their vantage point, perception, or perspective in order to be able to see the world in a different light. Until that happens, you're kind of headbutting a brick wall when dealing with a toxic or negative person. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Once again, this is Scott Golden with Golden Opportunities Coaching. If I can help you in any way with this topic or any other, please comment below, rate, subscribe, and like the video. Also, in our About Me page, you can get more information on contacting our team directly. I remind you, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.